John McMullen joins us now live on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. As we're still a little over a week away from the Super Bowl. We'll dive a lot more into the game next week on the show, but there's still a lot of news and notes to dust off here, John. We talked quarterbacks pretty much exclusively on yesterday's show. One guy we didn't really touch on was Kirk Cousins, and he said he's willing to play under the franchise tag. There's been some reports that obviously, in fact, the GM came out and said a 10 out of 10 chance that Cousins is back in Washington. But do you think it is a slam dunk that Kirk Cousins is back in Washington?
Yeah, I do, and that's part of the reason I don't bring him up as potential free agent targets, because they will franchise him again if they have to. But when you talk about Kirk Cousins willing to play under the franchise tag, of course he is. He made $19.9 million under the franchise tag last season, and he's scheduled for a 20% raise off of that. So it was a big mistake for Washington not to sign him to a long-term deal when they had the opportunity last offseason, because he's made himself a lot of money. There are people in this league that will pay him a ton of money, and if you could have gotten him for $16 or $17 million a year, which they probably could have on a long-term deal last season, and they were hemming and hawing about it, all of a sudden that would be a bargain, because he's going to make more than that, and probably significantly more.
Where do you put him on that? Is he a guy you can win a Super Bowl with, your opinion?
He's not a guy that can carry it to the Super Bowl. He's one of those guys that could certainly win a Super Bowl, but everything has to be in place around him. But when you talk about franchises in this league, and you mentioned it being a ghost yesterday, Mike, everybody wants Tom Brady, everybody wants Aaron Rodgers, but there aren't that many of them. And you could do a heck of a lot worse than Kirk Cousins, and that's the point. Are you going to be able to improve on that? No chance. So you have to move forward in a different direction. You're going to have sound play at that position, and you got to build up around it.
John, do you think the Eagles with Carson Wentz are in better shape than Washington with Cousins?
Long term, yes. Not next season or anything that quickly. But, yeah, I think Carson Wentz has a real opportunity to be a true franchise quarterback. But it's going to take a while, and it's going to take probably 3 or 4 years before he gets into the wheelhouse of his career. And hopefully if he develops at that point, I think the Eagles would be better off. But in the short term, I don't think there's any question Washington is better off for next season. But I agree with the way the Eagles are doing it, because I think it's more important to get that potential franchise guy who's in place for hopefully 10 years or more.
There are a lot of good quarterbacks in the NFC East. Do you think the New York Giants start to look for Eli's replacement?
Oh, they have to. They have to. Besides the age, and Eli's going to be 36 years old, dirty little secret, he hasn't played very well in a number of seasons, and he didn't play well again this season. So you have a player in decline who probably was a little overrated to begin with because of his surname and the 2 Super Bowl championships, which were really fueled, both of them, by the front four in the defense. So you have that sort of overrated to begin with, descending, not nearly as good as his name would indicate, certainly nowhere near his brother. The Giants have to be looking at it's not to say it's going to happen next season, but they have to realize they don't have a lot of time to find the next quarterback for the Giants.
Talking with John McMullen here, looking at the NFL news and notes. I'm not a big proponent of the Thursday night games, and Goodell kind of came out and he kind of dismissed that the game's quality were not as good as the Sunday games. In fact, he tried to pitch that they're actually better, less penalties, and for whatever that's worth. But I was surprised that DeMaurice Smith came out and basically said that the players are not a big issue for the games. The Thursday night games are not a big issue for the players. I was a little surprised by that.
Well, I think you said 50-50, which, I would agree with that from DeMaurice Smith's standpoint. Some people dislike it. Some people don't care. I think certainly if they were offered the opportunity to play on Thursday or Sunday, they're going to choose Sunday every time. So that's one of those questions. You have to be careful of the way you word it. And the second part of Smith's indication, I think there are bigger issues they have to get to before Thursday night football that are more important to the players. That I would certainly agree with as well. And, Roger Goodell, probably the real answer is when he says the entertainment value isn't down or however he worded it, it's because, hey, the games on Sunday pretty much stink too. If they stink on Thursday and they stink on Sunday, it's kind of the same thing.
So you think the Thursday night games are here to stay, John?
Oh, sure. I never doubted that because it's about money. And as long as people are willing to pay for that package, and so far there's no shortage of networks willing to pay for that package, it's not going away.
Can't they just put a third package together? Like, okay, if somebody wants Thursday night, can't they just say, look, we're going to put a third game, a third network on Sunday? And why not just say, oh, look, NBC, Fox, and if CBS wants a game, we'll put a game on Sunday. We'll put 3 games on. Why does it just have to be 2 networks? That's always the answer for me is like, well, it's money. If someone wants to put a package together, but why can't I just put another game on another network Sunday at 1:00? What's the big deal?
Well, I think a couple things. They want it to be more standalone. So certainly networks aren't going to like it if they have different windows and and then you sort of compete against each other. They've talked about those London games, making them that early start, but they've nixed that. And that's part, by the way,
which I liked. I liked the London game.
Yeah, the ratings just came out. They were down 8%. So that's the official number as how far they were down. And a lot of that had to do with we talked in the past. It did have to do with the presidential election because it was down 14% by the time the election was over, and then it rebounded. And the final numbers were only down 8%. Now, part of the other issue is oversaturation. And if you put in another window on Sunday, it's the same problem you have with Thursday. I think they've hit the tipping point, and there might be, with the Thursday night, might be a little bit too much football because I don't know many people who are excited with that Thursday night game unless their particular team is playing in it.
I tend to agree with you. I remember a time when it first came out, you were like, this is cool, or, this is exciting, there's a game on. But I think as time went on, and you were realizing, John,
pretty quickly, too.
Yeah, that the game was not a good game. Like, I just don't recall very good matchups on Thursday nights. They just seemingly gave you the worst matchup they could find and just said, hey, it's NFL, you're going to watch it.
Yeah, the matchups at times haven't been great. Everybody's got to have one Thursday night.
At times, 85% of the time.
So you're going to have those horrible teams, and they tend to be bad matchups. And, but that's going to happen. The same thing happens with Monday Night Football. Sometimes teams you project them to be better at the beginning of the season than they are, and all of a sudden you got a terrible matchup, standalone matchup on Monday night. So I don't know how you fix that because if everybody's got to partake, you're going to have some bad teams on there. So I would love to see it go away, but it's not going away.
I agree. It's interesting that, that the league, I think there's ways around it. I mean, I think there's things that you can do to try to, to make it better, including giving you some better matchups, maybe working the bye around it. Maybe shortening the Thursday night docket, and working the buys around that, using it for teams off the bye, something to that extent. I think there's that possibility out there. Do they need 16 or 17 weeks of Thursday night games? Probably not, to make it a little bit more special. But I kind of agree that, when there's money attached, it's not going to go anywhere. A couple other things. The touchback rule, that was new this year, and I'm interested to see if that's something that comes back, because I think one team that utilized it was New England. Like, if you watch them play, they don't kick the ball into the end zone because they give you the ball at the 25. They make you take the ball out. They'll kick it short, thinking, we're not going to give you the ball on the 25-yard line. So I'm wondering, because that was a safety rule, right? They put that touchback rule in for safety reasons.
Yeah, and they just released the safety study today and had a conference call about it, and there was no real change as far as injuries on kickoffs and things of that nature. So as I predicted, once they installed that rule, I thought it was much ado about nothing, and it turned out to be that way. Other than the strategy standpoint, and as you mentioned, Mike, it tends to be Bill Belichick is ahead of the curve, and he's the one who said, yeah, I'm not going to give you the football for the most part, depending on who it is. There are certain guys, Cordero Patterson would be first off the list that, you never want to kick it to because they might take it to the house. But there's very few of those type returners. And you are better off if you have a good kicker who can directionally do things properly. You're gonna pooch it. You're gonna mortar kick it and try to tackle them inside the 25. And the Patriots certainly weren't the first to think of it because everybody talked about it. But at the end of the day, most coaches just erred on the side of caution and want to kick it for the touchback.
John McMullen's with us here, 97.3 ESPN.com, and, of course, he covers the league nationally, national NFL columnist at FanRag NFL. And, the next week with that Super Bowl, we'll probably, dive a lot more into the game, but something here locally, a couple things locally with the Eagles let's dive into. You wrote about it, Carson Wentz. I thought this was funny. When I saw that, the article you wrote, Wentz hires mechanics coach, and I'm thinking, Peterson, no. DeFilippo, no. Frank Reich, 3 guys who played in the NFL, no. Tell us a little bit about why he's going outside the organization to fix his mechanics when he's got 3 quarterbacks on his damn roster.
Yeah, it's not about that. It's got more to do with the collective bargaining agreement, and you're limited in the off season about how much you can work with those coaches. So you can't be at the NovaCare complex working in a practice-type session for a large majority of the off-season. You have very limited windows, and that's what the players fought for in the CBA, and that's been an issue for coaches around this league since it was implemented in 2011 because you've seen the lack of fundamentals, not just at the quarterback position, but in a number of other positions. We talk about offensive linemen, cornerbacks, what have you. The technique's not there. They can't work with the coach. So it's become sort of a cottage industry to hire these personal coaches, not just for quarterbacks, but for other positions as well. And if you want to be great in this league, you almost have to do it because, as I said, you can't practice at the team facility for a large part of the offseason.
So this is more I need to have somebody that I'm allowed to work with more than the guys I have stink.
Exactly. That's not saying these guys aren't helping me. He just understands. I mean, from the time, as I wrote on 973ESPN.com, from the time the Eagles drafted him, Doug Peterson was talking about mechanics. I mean, they drilled it into him. And he was rock solid at the beginning of the season when the Eagles got off to the great start. They really did a good job. And then all of a sudden, as the season goes on and you're in regular season mode, there's not a ton of time for sort of maintenance work. It's about getting ready for the next opponent. The mechanics slowly slipped in the second half of the season. He had a real difficult time, and it's one of the toughest things to do as a player because your mechanics as a quarterback tend to be a DNA thing, sort of muscle memory, and to change them, it's just repetition, 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 and you don't get a ton of repetition. And he knows he needs more than just the OTAs and the mini camps and training camp. And I give him a lot of credit for seeking out one of the better coaches out there and trying to work on it when he's not with the Eagles.
And you'll like this, Mike Gill. That coach that he sought out is Adam Daydew. And if that name sounds familiar, first of all, he's got a baseball background. He's the grandson of Rod Daydew, who worked for USC and won all these College World Series over and over and over again. And Adam's background is in baseball, was with the Dodgers as a left-handed pitcher and then an assistant coach for the USC baseball team. So now, like John says, a lot of guys using baseball techniques to improve their football throwing.
Yeah, and Tom House is also, he's sort of Tom House was an ex-Major League pitcher who's gone on to be a guy that NFL quarterbacks swear by as far as mechanics go. And it's interesting because obviously there are a lot of the same issues that pitchers go through. And you've seen it many times when pitchers lose their mechanics, they have a really, really difficult time. So there are a couple guys who work together. They translated it, and they've had a lot of success. They've worked with Drew Brees and Tom Brady, and right there, if those guys are looking at you, that's pretty good.
John, real quick on the Eagles. Today they parted ways with another executive. You know, we've heard of a lot of this over the Roseman era. Rick Mueller, a guy you might, maybe not a name that is familiar with the listeners here, but we've heard a lot of personnel guys over the years. Louis Riddick, Grigson, Jason Light. A lot of guys kind of just left the organization here. Is this just, hey, your time is up, or was there some friction? Because anytime you hear personnel director leaving and Roseman involved, sometimes you get concerned.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's one of those things you have to put your antennas up. I think it has more to do this time, and I'm trying to text people and find out, but my gut is it has more to do with Joe Douglas taking over the personnel department and wanting to bring in people he's comfortable with and build things how he wants to. But we'll see. I mean, you're right. I often talk about how he's got a lot of pelts on the wall because he tends to win these power struggles. But I don't think this is one of those times. I think this more has to do with Joe Douglas just letting contracts expire and then bringing in people he wants to bring in.
All right, John, we obviously, the NFL never stops. A lot going on in that world. The one thing is, when do the Eagles, when the cap casualties, when does that all start? When you start to see these veteran cap guys start to get lopped off?
It can start happening anytime when you want to release people, but generally as free agency approaches, you'll see more of it. And I think, the Eagles are going to make significant salary cap space before free agency starts. And there's some obvious ones. Ryan Matthews would be at the top of that list. Connor Barwin is not going to be back at the number that he's currently scheduled to make next season. I think the Eagles might want to restructure. Jason Peters is going to be interesting. Leotis McKelvin, I think, is probably going to be released. Even a guy like Alan Barber. I don't think he's going to be released, but that might be a surprise. There's going to be a lot of guys who are on the chopping block, and if they don't restructure, even Jason Peters, I don't think Jason Peters is going to be back at his number that he's currently scheduled. I think he's going to have to renegotiate, or the Eagles are going to move on. So they're going to make a lot of decisions in the coming weeks, and that's why I say they don't have a ton of salary cap space if you look at it today. But don't be too concerned with that because Howie Roseman is going to make some space.
as we would anticipate with Howie in charge. Joe Douglas and Howie Roseman at the Senior Bowl. Jeff Lurie down there as well. And there were some reports, John, that Lurie is taking on a bigger role. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but that he's around.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing, to be honest. Supposedly he took on a bigger role after the Chip Kelly nonsense and sort of put his foot down, and everything's got to run through the owner now. But I think from a football standpoint, the last thing we want is an owner thinking he knows personnel. And I think the Eagles are better off just letting Joe Douglas do his job. And we'll see how that shakes out, because we've seen in the past Howie loves personnel. Now you have Jeff Lurie getting even more involved. So we'll see how it all shakes out, but I'd prefer to have Joe Douglas making all the significant personnel decisions.
I think probably 90% of our audience concurs with that comment right there. John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. And, of course, the NFL news and notes always daily on the Sports Bash. Get your NFL fix with John here with us. And, of course,
John
next
have
week.
a cat? Can he raise it?
Yeah, John, you coming to the dark side yet? You raising cats? Are you are you on board?
I've had cats in the past, but now I have a dog, and my dog is very, very energetic, so he would not get along with cats. So while I do love cats, the dog takes precedence.
Okay, well, raise your dog.
At the present time.
Sixers with 9 wins in the month of January, 10 all of last year.
Just wanted to squeeze
Put
that
those
in
cats
before
up
we
there,
let him
pal.
go.
All right, John McMullen.
Hey, by the way, if the Sixers had Ben Simmons from day one, they would have been a playoff team.
Concur. And that's not the what was that commercial? The Concur? What is that?
Right, concur. It's for expense reports.
Oh, expense report. Yeah, that's not just an expense report. I actually agree with you, John. We agree on the Sixers. This is unbelievable. All right, take care, pal. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right, guys.